Hey guys, Rob here at 3D Printscape. Today I'm going to show you how to create custom firmware for your Creality 32-bit boards. I'm going to walk you through the entire process start to finish. We're going to talk about the software you have to download, the plugins you're going to have to install, and then we'll go through making some of the changes necessary to get it to work. After all of that's done, we'll go ahead and put the new firmware on the SD card. I'll show you how to import it into the printer, and that'll pretty much cover all of it. If you have any questions about the process or run into any issues, go ahead and leave a comment below and I'll try to help you out. Or if you're interested, you can go ahead and join us on Discord. I'll have an invite listed below as well. And there we have a decent growing community who've been really good at helping each other out as well. So if you do run into issues, you do have support. Alright, the first thing we need to do is install VS Code, and then we have to install a plugin for that. So we want to go to the VS Code download site, which I'll link to in the description below, but it's going to be this right here. And then just go to download, and it's going to download that for us. And then we want to go ahead and kick that off. So accept the license agreement, and then it's just going to be default settings all the way through, unless you're planning on changing the location for the install directory or anything like that. Alright, now we want to go ahead and launch VS Code. Alright, now that VS Code is open, we want to go ahead and install the plugin we were talking about. It's going to be the platformio plugin. Now there might be some differences between what you're seeing here and what you're seeing on your computer. I went through and I installed everything, I think, but there might be some things that were kind of left behind from when I did the uninstall so I can do this video. So if you see anything that's slightly different, don't worry about it, just follow what I'm talking about. Alright, so we want to install platformio. So just go ahead and search for that, and it's going to be this guy here, and then we'll just click on install. Now this could take a couple minutes to install. It's going to kick off some of the process down here. Let's go ahead and restart VS Code. And then we should see that installed now. So we got our platformio here, and then any dependencies that it had. All right, now we need to go ahead and get the firmware that we're going to be working with. So let's go ahead and jump back over to the browser. We want to go to the Marlin download site. There's two things we want to get. We're going to want to get the configuration bundle and then the actual firmware. So I'm assuming you're going to want to be using the bug fix. That's what a lot of people who are doing their own firmware end up going with. So I'm going to just download that. And then we want to go over to configurations and download that as well. So if we go to code and just download zip, that'll give us what we need. All right, now that we have both of those, let's go ahead and unzip them. So we'll just extract them to this location. And then same for the other one for our configuration examples. We'll just go ahead and extract all there. So one thing I wanted to point out here is if you have the firmware folder too deep into the directory structure, you're going to have issues with it building. There's a file length limitation, and I know if the names are too long, it does get triggered. So if you look here, this is probably too deep. So I'm going to move it up to probably just my desktop so I can work off of it there and just rename it. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that really quick. And then I'm just going to rename it as Marlin. And then here we can open that back up. All right, so you can see it's closer. I haven't had issues around this layer, but if you have it buried within your downloads folder, you will end up having issues with it building. All right, so now we need to make a couple changes. We want to go ahead and go into Marlin, and we want to delete the configuration and configuration advanced.h files. There are too many changes that need to be made to those. It doesn't make sense to go ahead and go that route when they already provide examples. So if we go to the folder that we extracted from the examples, we go into config and then examples, and then we go down to Creality. and then you'll get the one for your printer. So if you have the Ender 3 Pro or the Ender 3 V2 or whatever you're working with, you'll just grab that. I have the Pro, so I'm going to use that as an example. So I'll just go in there, and then I've got the 422 board. They do give you other options if you wanted to use this with the Big Tree Tech or the SKR Minis, or if you have the V1 or the 427 board as well. But I have the 422. So I'm going to go and open that up, and then I'm going to copy these 4 files from this directory into the Marlin directory under the Marlin Firmware folder. And that's going to give us the baseline that we need to get started. All right, so before we go ahead and open this in VS Code, there's one thing we need to change. Let's go back to our root directory here, and this platformio.ini file, we have to update the default variable for the printer. So let's go ahead and open that. I'm just going to open it in Notepad++, which I have right here. And then this default environment here, we want to just delete that and replace it with this. So I'll put this variable in the description below. You want to make sure that you have the underscore Creality at the end. That's going to just change the way that it's creating the firmware, and then it's going to put a randomized number at the end, so you don't have any issues with it being the same as the previous one. All right, so now we just want to save that. All right, then we can go ahead and close out of this. Now we want to go over to VS Code and go up to File and Open Folder. So we want to open the folder that we're going to be working with. Like I said, I put it on my desktop, so it's just going to be this Marlin folder here. And just select that and open. All right, and if you built this now, it will work on that version, but there's a lot of changes that I recommend that we make. So I'm going to go ahead and walk through those. If you wanted to just drag this over to the printer and use the default settings, you can do that. Just go down to here and click the check mark to go ahead and kick off a build. You'll see it run through the build process. And I'll show you how to get that package here in a couple minutes after we get through the rest of the changes. All right, so now we want to open up the Marlin folder, and we want to update components in the configuration and configuration_advanced. So we'll start with the configuration file first. I have a list of changes that I want to make. I'll just walk through them as we're going. Like I said, most of the settings required to get things to work are already going to be here, just because we use the examples. If we didn't, we'd have to make a lot of changes through all of this, and it's really a pain. All right, so I'm going to change the printer name. I'm just going to do, and then I'm going to go ahead and just search for the changes that I want to make. All right, so the first one is going to be zmin probe. So z_min. We need to change this from false to true. All right, next one is going to be the S-curve acceleration. And I don't want to get into too much detail around the whys on this. I'm just kind of showing you how to get it working. If you have questions about some of the changes, you can leave a comment below or reach out to us on Discord. All right, next one is, I have the BLTOUCH, so I'm going to walk through that as well. If you don't have it, you can skip through those settings. You don't have to do it. I'll make a note if the change is for the BLTOUCH or not. So the next one is BLTOUCH. This is obviously for the BLTOUCH. So we want to enable that. And then scroll down here. We want to set our offsets. I have the default carriage on there right now, so I believe it's -14 and -7. But if you're questioning that, you'll want to measure it. So here, as an example, would be your nozzle. And then if you go 14 over, 7 towards the front, that's where the probe is going to be. So I'd recommend actually measuring that if you don't have it. If you're just using the default bracket, you should be fine with this. All right, the next thing I want to search for is Z-Min probe. And yeah, this is what I'm looking for here. So depending on how you have this wired, we'll have to make a couple changes here. If you have the probe plugged into the Z-stop, then you'll leave it configured as is. If you have the Z-stop still plugged in and you have the probe plugged into the actual probe port on the board, then you want to comment this out and then uncomment this. If you don't do this and you have both of them connected, it's still going to use the mechanical Z-stop and it will end up jamming the nozzle into your build plate. So you don't want that. Next, we want to verify the bed size. So I'm just going to search for X bed size. Then it's 235, so those are right. These are the settings here for the Ender 3 Pro. If you're having issues where the line is kind of printing a little bit to the left or right off of the build plate, I've seen that happen before, you'll want to make an adjustment here. Just make it like -5, and that'll move it over to the right 5 millimeters. Or if you're too close to the front of the build plate, then you'll want to move this or adjust this one as well. And I'd use -10 on the last build. So it'd just be set up like that. So this is really up to you. It'll be based on how everything gets centered. But if you see that type of behavior, that's where you'll make those changes at. So I'm going to leave it standard for now. I just wanted to make a note of that. All right, next we want to search for Min software. And we want to comment out the Min software for the Z axis. This will allow you to go negative on your Z offset if you have a BLTOUCH. So again, this is specific to the BLTOUCH. The next setting is also going to be for BLTOUCH. It's going to be auto bed leveling. And then we want to uncomment out bilinear. And then if you go down a little bit further, you're going to see your grid. By default, you have a 3x3 grid. I know a couple of you guys have asked me how to increase that to a 5x5. You would just change this from 3 to 5. I'm going to leave it at 3 because that's fine for my printer, but if your bed's really warped, I would recommend bumping that to 5. Next is going to be level bed corners. Go ahead and uncomment that. And then I also like to uncomment out individual access homing menu. And the last thing is another BLTOUCH setting. It's Z Safe Home. And we just want to uncomment out that. All right, that's all we need to do here. Then we want to jump over to the configuration advanced file. All the changes in the configuration advanced file are for the BLTOUCH. So if you're not running one of those, you can skip this part. All right, so I'm going to search for BLTOUCH_delay. Uncomment this, and then uncomment this line as well, the force SW home. And then there's down a little bit further, there is BLTOUCH high speed mode. I'm going to uncomment that as well. One note I wanted to make here is if you have one of the off brands, you'll want to leave these commented. I've seen some issues with them. I've also seen it not engage properly and just not work. There was an instance that I was working with somebody on a couple weeks back that ended up being a result of these because he had one of the 3D Touch ones, and just did not like these settings for some reason. Now we want to enable the probe offset wizard. So search for just probe offset. If you have a BLTOUCH, you definitely want this. It makes setting your Z offset much easier. So just go ahead and uncomment that and then uncomment this line as well. The last group of changes we want to make is around baby stepping. So I'm just going to search for that. And it looks like in this version of the firmware, they already have it enabled. I do like to uncomment out baby step display total and Z probe offset. If you're on older versions of the firmware, this entire thing would be commented out, but it looks like they did make a change somewhat recently around that. And that's really all there is to it. So now we'll just want to go ahead and build that again. So we'll just go down here and hit the check mark. All of those warnings here are related to just a warning they put around the driver. So the 422 board comes with two different types of drivers. If you have a silent board, you're going to have to make a change. If you don't, then you don't have to worry about it. But if we go back to the configuration H and then just search for driver, you'll see here, this is where those warnings are coming from. So if you don't want to see those, you can just comment that out. But here is the driver that's needed for the non-silent version of the 422. If you have the silent version, you'll want to replace that with this, the TMC 2208 underscore standalone. All right, so now let's go ahead and get the build that we just finished. So I've got two Explorer windows open here. One of them right here is just my SD card. That's where we're going to put the file. You want to make sure that it's 8 gig or under ideally, and it has to be formatted as FAT32. So if it's not FAT32, you'll want to just go ahead and go down to format and then go ahead and reformat it. So make sure FAT32 is selected and then format it. I have some cards that are defaulting to different ones. This is just the default for an 8 gig card, so it works out okay. So now let's go back to our build folder. We want to go to .pio. If you're on a Mac, these folders that start with a dot will be hidden, so you'll have to get through it through CLI. All right, so you want to go in there, go to build, go to your board, and then you'll get the firmware.bin file. Because we've specified the board as being a Creality board, it's automatically adding the date and a random number at the end, so that way it doesn't match the previous one. If we were to flash the same firmware twice with the same name, it ends up being a blank screen when you reboot, or it doesn't take the file at all. I've seen both scenarios. So we're just going to copy this over to the SD card, and then we'll eject that. Then we'll just go ahead and enter that in the printer and restart it, or power it on if it's already powered off. I know I covered a lot in a short period of time here, so if you guys have any questions, like I said, go ahead and leave a comment below, or go ahead and join me on Discord. I'll try to answer any questions you have or help out if you're running into errors. Now that we got our firmware on the SD card, we'll go ahead and put it in the printer and turn it on. You're going to see the screen go blue here for a second while it pulls in the firmware. And then it's going to reboot with the new firmware on it. If you have issues where it doesn't actually pull in the firmware, you're going to want to do a couple of things. A, make sure you got the right size card. Ideally, it should be 8 gig or less. I know some people have had decent luck with using 16 gig. 32 seems to be a problem most of the time. And then make sure that nothing else is on it and that it's formatted with FAT32. But that's really all there is to it as far as loading it on the printer. Alright guys, so that was the process of creating custom firmware for your Creality 32-bit boards. If you run into any issues or have any questions, you can leave a comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can, or you can join us on Discord.